The knock on my door came at 7:43 a.m. on a Thursday, sharp and authoritative. I was in my home office reviewing acquisition reports for my real estate portfolio when I heard Dad's voice through the door. "Emma, we need to talk. Open up." I set down my coffee and walked to the front door of my apartment, already knowing this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. My parents had been increasingly frustrated with me over the past few months, ever since I'd stopped pretending that my freelance marketing work was anything more than a cover story. I opened the door to find both my parents standing in the hallway, Mom clutching a manila envelope and Dad wearing the expression he'd perfected during his 30 years as a high school principal. "Good morning," I said. "Emma, we need to discuss your living situation," Dad said without preamble, brushing past me into my apartment. Mom followed, her face a mixture of disappointment and determination. "Honey, this is very difficult for us." I closed the door and turned to face them. "What's going on?" Dad pulled a document from the envelope Mom was holding. "These are eviction papers. You're 3 months behind on rent and we can't continue to subsidize your lifestyle." I took the papers and read through them carefully. Standard eviction notice for non-payment of rent. 3 months behind as stated. Total amount due, $4,200. "You're right," I said calmly. Both my parents looked surprised by my reaction. "You're not going to argue?" Mom asked. "About what?" "The papers are accurate." What they didn't know was that I hadn't been paying rent to them because I'd been paying it to myself. Last week I'd completed the purchase of the entire building through one of my holding companies. The previous landlord, Mr. Patterson, had been eager to sell after managing the property for 15 years. My parents were now my tenants, though they didn't know it yet. "Emma," Dad continued, "your mother and I have been more than patient. We've let you live here for practically nothing, hoping you'd get your act together and find a stable career. Instead of that computer nonsense," Mom added helpfully. The computer nonsense was actually Meridian Digital, a marketing automation company that generated $73 million in annual revenue and employed 180 people across 3 states. But my parents saw it as me playing around on the internet, instead of getting what Dad called a real job with benefits. "We love you," Mom said, tears starting to form in her eyes, "but enabling you isn't helping you grow up." I looked around my apartment, the same space I'd been living in for 4 years while building my business empire. My parents had no idea that their struggling daughter had just purchased not only this building, but 6 others in the downtown area. "So what happens now?" I asked. "You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live," Dad said firmly. "We should have done this years ago. And if I can't find another place? Then you'll have to move back home with us until you figure out your life." Move back home. At 28 with a net worth of $47 million, they wanted me to move back into my childhood bedroom because they thought I couldn't afford my own rent. "I understand," I said. Dad looked relieved that I wasn't fighting the decision. "Emma, this is for your own good. Sometimes people need a push to reach their potential." "You're probably right." Mom stepped forward and hugged me. "We're not abandoning you, sweetheart. We're trying to help you become independent." Independent. If only they knew that I'd been financially independent since I was 24, and that I'd been quietly helping them with their own financial struggles for the past 2 years. The property taxes they thought they'd caught up on through good budgeting? That was me paying them through a shell company. The lucky break they'd gotten on their car repairs last year? Also me anonymously covering the cost. "Can I ask you something?" I said as they were preparing to leave. "Of course," Mom said. "When was the last time either of you asked me how my business was really doing?" Dad frowned. "Emma, we've talked about your computer work plenty of times. When have you asked about my revenue, my growth projections, my client base, my employee count? Because those aren't real metrics for freelance work," Dad said dismissively. "You can't build a career on Instagram posts and website design." I almost laughed. Instagram posts and website design. Dad had no idea that my company had just signed a $12 million contract with a Fortune 100 retailer to automate their entire customer acquisition process. "So you've never been curious about the specifics of what I do?" "Honey," Mom said gently, "we know you try hard, but at some point you need to face reality." "What reality is that?" "That you're 28 years old, living in a subsidized apartment, with no savings and no stable income." I looked at my parents, these people who had raised me and loved me, and completely failed to see what I'd become. Hey, I said. I'll start looking for a new place. After they left, I sat in my kitchen and called my property manager, James Rodriguez. James, it's Emma. I need you to prepare some paperwork. What kind of paperwork? Eviction notices for Thomas and Linda Carter, Unit 4B at Riverside Gardens. There was a pause. Emma, those are your parents. I'm aware. You want me to evict your own parents? I want you to prepare standard eviction notices for tenants who are habitually late with rent payments and have been disruptive to building management. This was technically true. My parents had been late with their rent 7 times in the past 18 months, and they'd complained to the previous landlord constantly about building maintenance, other tenants, and neighborhood noise levels. What's the grounds for eviction? Lease violations. Noise complaints from other tenants. And they've been subletting part of their apartment without permission. This was also true. My Uncle Mike had been staying in their spare bedroom for 6 months, paying them cash that they'd never reported to the landlord. Emma, are you sure about this? James, they just served me eviction papers because they think I can't afford to pay my own rent. I think it's time they learned what actual property management looks like. When do you want the notices delivered? Tomorrow morning. 8 a.m. sharp. The next morning I was in my office reviewing quarterly reports when James called. The notices have been delivered, he said. How did they react? Your father answered the door. He seemed confused at first, then angry. He kept saying there must be some mistake. Did you explain the grounds for eviction? I tried to, but he demanded to speak to the building owner. What did you tell him? That the owner prefers to handle tenant communications through property management. Good. Emma, your mother was crying. Are you sure you want to do this to them? I looked out my office window at the city skyline, at the buildings I'd helped develop and the businesses I'd helped grow. James, my parents just tried to evict me because they think I'm a failure. They're about to learn that their failure daughter owns their building. And then what? Then we'll see if they're more interested in having a relationship with me or with maintaining their assumptions about me. At 9:15 a.m. my phone rang. Dad. Emma, something insane is happening. What's wrong, Dad? We got eviction papers this morning. Some property management company is claiming we violated our lease. That sounds serious. It's ridiculous. We've been model tenants for 8 years. There must be some mistake. What are the grounds for eviction? Late rent payments, noise complaints, and unauthorized subletting. But Emma, we've only been late a few times and Uncle Mike isn't subletting, he's just staying with us temporarily. Temporarily for 6 months? How did you know it's been 6 months? I realized I'd revealed more than I intended. Lucky guess. What are you going to do? We're going to fight this. I called a lawyer and he says we have rights as tenants. Probably a good idea to get legal advice. Emma, can you believe this timing? We just had to evict you yesterday and now we're getting evicted ourselves. Ironic. The property management company says the new building owner is taking a harder line on lease violations. Apparently, the building was sold recently. Do you know who bought it? Some investment company. Meridian Holdings or something like that. Meridian Holdings was one of my shell companies. I'd purchased the building under that name to maintain privacy. Dad, maybe you should just talk to the new owner directly. We tried. The property manager says the owner doesn't deal with tenants personally. That seems unreasonable. Exactly. What kind of person buys a building and then immediately starts evicting long-term tenants? I almost said, the kind of person whose parents just evicted her for being 3 months behind on rent. But I managed to restrain myself. Maybe if you explain your situation to the owner, they'll be understanding. How can we explain anything if they won't take meetings? I don't know, Dad. Maybe write a letter. At noon Mom called. Emma, we're in crisis mode here. This eviction notice is a nightmare. I'm sorry to hear that, Mom. We've been trying to reach the building owner all morning but they won't talk to us. We don't know what we did wrong. The notice mentioned late rent payments. We've been late a few times but we always catch up. And it's not like we're terrible tenants. We keep the apartment clean, we don't throw parties, we report maintenance issues properly. What about Uncle Mike? What about him? The notice mentioned unauthorized subletting. He's not a subletter. He's family going through a difficult time. We're helping him get back on his feet. For 6 months. Emma, whose side are you on? The question hung in the air for a moment. Mom, I'm not on anyone's side. I'm just trying to understand the situation. The situation is that some heartless investor bought our building and decided to kick out the long-term tenants to raise the rent. Heartless investor. If only she knew that the heartless investor was her daughter, who had actually been subsidizing their below-market rent for years. Maybe the new owner has expenses you don't know about, I suggested. Whose expenses could possibly justify evicting people who've lived somewhere for 8 years? Building maintenance, property taxes, insurance, mortgage payments. Emma, you sound like you're defending them. I'm just saying there might be more to the story. There's nothing more to the story. This is pure greed and we're not going to stand for it. That evening, I received an email from James with photos attached. Mom and Dad had organized the other tenants to create protest signs and were planning to picket outside the building's management office. One sign read, "Meridian Holdings, Greedy Landlords." Another said, 8 years of perfect tenancy equals eviction notice. I was looking at the photos when my phone rang. It was my business partner and best friend, Sarah. Emma, I heard about the eviction situation. Are you really going through with this? Going through with what? Evicting your own parents. They evicted me first. That's different and you know it. Is it? They served me legal papers because they thought I couldn't afford my rent. Now they're facing legal papers because they've actually violated their lease terms. Emma, they're your parents. Parents who think their 28-year-old daughter is a failure living off their charity. Sarah was quiet for a moment. What do you want to accomplish here? I looked around my apartment at the space my parents thought they owned in the building I just purchased. I want them to understand that their assumptions about me have consequences. And after they understand? I don't know yet. Emma, you could destroy your relationship with them over this. Sarah, what relationship? They think I'm an unemployed loser who can't pay her own bills. They've spent 4 years treating me like a charity case instead of asking who I really am. So show them who you really are. I tried that. They dismissed my business as computer nonsense and decided I needed to be evicted for my own good. And now they get to experience what it feels like when someone makes decisions about their housing situation without consulting them. The next morning, James called with an update. Your parents hired a lawyer, he said. I expected that. They're demanding a meeting with the building owner to discuss their eviction. What did you tell them? That Meridian Holdings doesn't typically take meetings with individual tenants. And they said they're prepared to take this to court if necessary. I almost smiled. Dad had always been a fighter when he thought he was in the right. James, set up a meeting for Monday morning. 10 a.m. You'll meet with them? Yes, but don't tell them who the owner is. Just say that Meridian Holdings has agreed to hear their case. Emma, are you sure about this? I'm sure. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly. I dressed in my best business suit, the one I'd worn for the Forbes photo shoot that my parents had never seen, and arrived at our property management office 15 minutes early. James had set up the conference room with water and coffee. At exactly 10 a.m. he escorted my parents and their lawyer into the room. Dad stopped short when he saw me sitting at the head of the conference table. Emma, what are you doing here? I'm here for the meeting you requested with the building owner. Mom looked confused. Honey, we're meeting with the owner of Meridian Holdings. That's right. The lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in her 50s, stepped forward. Ms. Carter, I think there's been some confusion. We're here to meet with the property owner about my client's eviction notice. There's no confusion, I said calmly. Please, everyone sit down. Dad remained standing. Emma, there's obviously been some mistake. We need to meet with whoever owns our building. You are meeting with whoever owns your building. The room went silent. That's impossible, Mom whispered. I opened the folder in front of me and pulled out the property deed. Meridian Holdings purchased the Riverside Gardens apartment complex on March 15th of this year. I am the sole owner of Meridian Holdings. Dad sank into a chair. You own our building? I own your building, Mom and Dad's building, and 6 others in this neighborhood. But you're 3 months behind on rent, Mom said weakly. I'm 3 months behind on rent because I've been paying rent to myself since I bought the building, and it seemed unnecessarily complicated to process those payments. The lawyer was looking back and forth between us like she was watching a tennis match. Emma, Dad said slowly, how could you possibly afford to buy an entire apartment building? I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, then slid it across the table. $47 million, the lawyer read aloud. Liquid assets, I clarified. The property holdings are separate. Mom was staring at the phone like it was a foreign object. Emma, this can't be real. It's real, Mom. My computer nonsense company generated $73 million in revenue last year. 73 million? Dad's voice cracked. We're expanding into artificial intelligence and machine learning. I have meetings with Google and Microsoft scheduled for next month. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. So, the lawyer finally said, about the eviction notice. I looked at my parents, these people who had raised me and loved me and completely misjudged what I'd become. The eviction notice stands, I said. Emma. Mom gasped. Unless, I continued, the tenants in question can demonstrate that they've learned something from this experience. What kind of demonstration? Dad asked quietly. An acknowledgement that making assumptions about people without bothering to learn the facts has consequences. We know you're successful now, Mom said. Do you? Or are you just processing the shock of finding out your failure daughter owns your building? Dad leaned forward. Emma, what do you want us to say? I want you to tell me what you've learned. We've learned that we don't know our daughter as well as we thought we did. And that we made assumptions about your life without asking you about your reality. What else? Mom spoke up. We've learned that trying to evict someone for not meeting our expectations is complicated. How so? Because the person you're evicting might be the person who actually has the power in the situation. I looked at them both, these flawed human people who had just received the shock of their lives. The eviction notice is rescinded, I said finally. Really? Mom started crying with relief. But there are new lease terms. What kind of terms? The lawyer asked. First, no more complaints to building management unless there are genuine safety issues. Second, Uncle Mike needs to be added to the lease officially or find other housing arrangements. Third, rent is now due on the first of the month with no grace period. And fourth, Dad asked, Sunday dinner once a month. Here in my apartment, where we talk honestly about our lives without anyone making assumptions about anyone else's situation. Dad stood up and walked around the table to where I was sitting. Emma, I'm proud of you. Not just for your success but for teaching us something we clearly needed to learn. What's that? That love means paying attention to who people actually are instead of who we think they should be. As I hugged my parents in the conference room of the building I owned, I realized that sometimes the most valuable property you can acquire isn't real estate. Sometimes it's the real relationship with the people you love, built on a foundation of truth instead of assumptions. The eviction notice had been rescinded, but the education was permanent.